Now, my sister was no ordinary woman. No woman ever is, but to me, my sister, less than any. When my mother died, she, my sister, had become my mother, and more mother to me than any mother could ever have been. I was immensely proud of her. I shone in the reflection of her green-eyed, black-haired gypsy beauty. She sang at her work in a voice so pure that the local men said she had a bell in every tooth and was gifted by God. And these pundits who revelled in music of any kind and who had agreed many times with much self-congratulations that of all instruments devised by man, crwth, violin, pipcorn, dulcimer, viola, church organ, zither, harp, brass band, woodwind, or symphony orchestra, they had smugly agreed that there was no noise as beautiful at its best as the sound of the human voice. She had a throat that should have been coloured with down like a small bird, and eyes so hazel green and open that, to preserve them from too much knowledge of evil, should have been hooded and vultured and not, as they were, terrible in their vulnerability. She was innocent and guileless and infinitely protectable. She was naive to the point of saintliness and wept a lot at the misery of others. She felt all tragedies except her own. I had read of the knights of chivalry, and I knew that I had a bounden duty to protect her above all other creatures. It wasn't until 30 years later, when I saw her in another woman, that I realized I had been searching for her all my life. That's it.
That out. That meant a huge amount to you, and in doing so meant an awful lot to everybody here, I'm sure, and I'm sure there's not a dry eye in the house at the moment. I don't know if you agree, Robert, but as I was listening to that, I suddenly began to think of Enobarbus in praise of Cleopatra. In Antony and Cleopatra, the barge she sat on, is a great, the rhythm and sat in. Oh gosh, another one. No, I stand well corrected, that's good. Rhiannon, he loved Shakespeare, didn't he? And in his writing there's a great deal of sort of musicality and sort of Shakespearean structure almost.
A bit of Dylan Thomas, perhaps?
Perhaps. He may be more so Dylan Thomas than Shakespeare. Yes, definitely. I'd like now, thank you so much, to involve you, Robert. You are a great lifelong friend of Richard's. When was your first encounter?
Was at Oxford. We were both there at the end of 1943, half in uniform. We were both in the RAF, all other cadets, volunteer cadets for the RAF, and we met at a meeting of some theatrical enterprise, and they wanted, all the people there wanted a director, and it was open to the house. Would anybody like to direct The Dog Beneath the Skin? Total silence. I was asked again, and then a voice, an extraordinary voice, the most extraordinary voice that anybody had ever heard, certainly that I've ever heard. Standing by the piano over there said, I can get you the best director in the world. So I looked and thought, that's a damn brave thing to say. And everybody said, goodness, how thrilling. Who is that? And Rich said, it was he, said, my father, meaning Philip, his adoptive father. And I thought, that is the most arrogant claim that I've ever heard in my life. What a poisonous fellow, I'll avoid him. And we were introduced to each other, everybody met everybody else on this occasion, and we absolutely hated each other. I thought he was really beyond the pale, and he thought I was beyond the other pale. You know? Until one day, not very long afterwards, and we were looking at a navigational RAF map on the table, and we happened to be by each other. You two over there, said the sergeant in charge. And we looked, and we both saw at the same time the River Trent. And I forget which one started it, but one of us said, "See where this river comes me cranking in and cuts me from the best of all my land, a great half moon, a monstrous cantrell out. I'll have the current in this place dammed up." And the other took up, "And here the smug and silver Trent shall run in a new channel, fair and evenly." And we looked at each other with entirely new eyes. We had taken a speech about the River Trent from the map, from our shared adoration of William Shakespeare. And from then on, we became closer and closer friends. That's how we first met.
I'd just like to, for you to share with the audience what you shared with me just a moment ago, that shared adoration of Shakespeare. You spoke to me of how the two of you used to challenge each other to sort of recite almost a whole play from beginning to end.
Yes, we used to try and catch each other out. Okay, Henry IV, Part 1, you start. So shaken as we are, so one with calves, find we a time for frighted peace to pant and breathe, and so on, you know. And then 25 minutes later, whoever had started, "Oh damn, well, what does Hotspur say there?" "Okay, one," says the other one, and picks up and goes on. We used to challenge each other like this, and walking over a particular airfield, Burton RAF, in Norfolk, we used to do the whole play, Henry IV 1, Henry IV 2, Richard 2, Henry V, which later, of course, both of us came to play enormous parts in. In fact, I understudied him as Prince Hal when he, as one might say, came out and enchanted the world of theatre with his Prince Hal. Well, one critic said that he had the strength and silence of a cathedral, I think was the phrase. It's perfectly true. He only had to stand there on stage, and you might as well save your trouble to be on stage doing something else, because nobody looked at anybody else. But my thrill about this book, which I've gone through every page of, and I think I've made notes and quote marks on every page, is that, as happens when you get to my age, and we were both born within 10 days of each other in 1925, so you can do the maths, and you know what Rich would be now if he'd survived, and sadly he didn't. Although I have a suspicion that he wouldn't really have happily, enjoyably made old bones, as the phrase has it. But because of my age, memories of Rich, except for particular sharp moments, was beginning to fade a bit, like the leaves come off the trees at this time of year. And then this suddenly came in front of me. And there was Rich again, in all his glory and horror and vivid imagination, his invention, his myth-making. He was alive again for me, and for days I've been going around thinking, well, where is he? He's about somewhere. It's all in this book. To go back to this question about diaries, you know, whether he wrote it for himself, as Chris said, in some parts, the best parts, I think you suggested, he was writing, he was monitoring himself. He was trying to get himself together, to understand himself, which I think, like everybody around him, he found an almost insuperable task. He was a very, very complicated person. And he keeps saying in the diary, "This is for me alone, for my eyes alone." And then he admits that Elizabeth is looking at it and saying to him, "Why don't you write about me?" And then there are times when it's plain to me, I think, that he is writing for two reasons, possibly to perpetuate himself forever, perhaps, partly because, as again Chris said so rightly, he longed above all things to go back to Oxford, to become a fellow, to take a full degree and contribute a work of rare quality to leave behind him. And in its variegated, curious, explosive, fantastical fashion, this work for me does it. This is an extraordinary and unusual work of literature, and he has left it for us. So in that degree, I think he's fulfilled what perhaps was his main ambition in life, because everything else bored him. Acting bored him to death. And women were a quick change engagement. So I could pick on.
You mentioned, Robert, that this diary has presented Richard back to you as if by magic. What particular recollections in the diary have suddenly come into sort of vivid colour for you?
Well, so many. I mean, I've marked, I couldn't know how many little quotes here. Just various elements of his nature. I'd love to read you a tiny bit that he writes about he'd heard that two Englishmen had decided to row across the Atlantic. And he goes on, their attitude is one that I think I understand but have no desire to try. To beat the physical body beyond human reason and still make it go on. But they say what they talked and dreamed of all the time was food and walks in country lanes and magnificent dinners in London, etc. In short, it must surely be masochistic, like the lunatic who, when asked why he knocked his head so much against the wall, said it was so nice when he stopped. Now that they're safely on land and in warmth and comfort, they probably think a great deal about the sea and its fascination. They'll try something hazardous again. I love that his observation of other people is acute and rich and vastly worth reading. Sometimes it's cruel because he could explode into a kind of vicious backlash against people who he otherwise greatly admired and indeed liked very much. You'll find that in the book. What the cause of that was, I don't know, but I think it's rooted in an extraordinarily profound sense of doom and dissatisfaction with the whole world and its occupants.
Yes, I mean, he can almost change his mind on someone over a page. I read that as a great sense of impatience, but mostly with himself, actually, more than anyone else. Yes.
I agree with that. I think he was very, very cross with himself very often, and therefore he would turn on other people as targets.
Robert, would you suggest or say that Richard was responsible for you beginning the road of along an acting career?
No, he tried terribly hard to stop it. Alas, he didn't succeed. And we exchanged letters, which, looking back, it must really have bored him to death, because I was being philosophical and jockeying up to the position of becoming an actor. I was going to be the actor. And I remember writing him a letter about how vital it was for an actor to streamline himself like a rocket and rid himself of all other thoughts of humanity, all other experiences. Absolute stuff. I mean, real boring balls. I wrote him, and how he must have hated it, but he was so kind. He was the most generous person I've ever met, in every way, when he was. And he did suspect that I wouldn't do any good as an actor, that I was absolutely the wrong kind of person to be an actor, and he concocted a scheme with his adoptive father, Philip, who gave me an audition in Cardiff. He was a BBC producer down there at that time. And I did a bit of audition, and Philip said, no, you must never think of the theatre. dullest voice I think I've ever heard. And my armour pop was completely saved by a door opening up at the back and footsteps coming down the iron stairs. And a voice, Welsh voice, saying, Philip, what are you saying to this young man? I think he's got a very subtle voice. And the man, whose name was Aneurin ap Talfon Davies, was my friend for life.